The blood on the sand was not human. It belonged to Korath the Undefeated, warlord of the Drathani, holder of 211 consecutive kills in the sovereign Colosseum of Tesmervint. He lay on his side, 3 hearts silent, plated chest split along the joint where his secondary armor met his primary. A spent ammunition magazine spun lazily on the sand beside him, catching the overhead lights as it turned. The crowd of 80,000 did not cheer. The crowd did not know what it had just watched. I am Kathres Val, senior arena broadcaster of Chamber 7, and I have called 4,063 death matches in my career. I have narrated the deaths of emperors and slaves, of children and gods. I have never, in 26 standard years behind that microphone, gone silent during a broadcast. I went silent that night. 9 seconds. That was all it took. 9 seconds from the moment the gate opened to the moment Korath stopped breathing. And in those 9 seconds, a quiet, middle-aged human named Marcus Vale, no, that is wrong, I will get it right by the end of this. A human named Marcus Vale did something no opponent had ever done. He reloaded his weapon. If you are looking for the truth of what happened in the Sovereign Colosseum that night, this is the brutal reality. The galaxy had spent 100 standard cycles laughing at humans. We called them the soft species, the pack animals, the sentimental ones. We made our betting markets accordingly. The bookmakers set his survival odds at 400 to 1. The cartel that sponsored Korath had already pre-recorded the victory celebration. And then he reloaded. Before I tell you how a human ended the longest streak in Colosseum history, please give this broadcast your approval and subscribe to the archive. I have many more truths to share from my decades behind the microphone, and I want to know where in the galaxy you are listening from. Leave it in the comments. I am told humans love that part. It is the small kindnesses, they say, that move them. Now, let me take you back to 9 seconds before the silence. Part 2. Combat in our galaxy is a strange and lazy thing. This is a truth most modern documentaries refuse to say plainly. They prefer the comfortable story that the galaxy's great warrior cultures have refined the art of killing into something noble and efficient. The reality is far stranger and far more embarrassing. The Drathani fight with energy lances that draw from a fusion core in the wielder's spine. The lance never runs dry. The wielder never reloads. The Scythian use ceremonial blades passed down through 12 generations, edges so sharp they cut light. The blade does not require maintenance. The Ohm fight with biological growths fused to their forearms, replenished by their own metabolism. Every advanced species, across every advanced civilization, has spent the last 10,000 cycles engineering its way past the boring parts of combat. Nobody reloads. Nobody clears jams. Nobody trains fundamentals. Try to grasp how strange this is. Imagine a billion-credit professional sport, say, the Threnic Velocity League, where nobody bothers to practice the basic throw anymore because every athlete has been gene-tailored to throw perfectly on the first attempt. The entire concept of drill has been engineered out of existence. The athletes no longer rehearse. They simply perform. And one day, a player from a backwater province walks onto the field and throws 10,000 baseline practice shots in a row, perfectly identical, while the genetically perfect athletes stand around confused because they have never seen a person miss and adjust before. That is the galactic combat economy in one image. Korath the Undefeated was the apex of this system. He had been bred, that is the only honest word, by the Threnic mining cartel over 6 generations, each generation selected for plate density, regenerative speed, and aggression response. His 3 hearts could compensate for the failure of anyone. His regenerative tissue could seal a clean wound in under 4 seconds. He stood 8 feet tall and weighed 900 kilograms, and had killed 211 opponents from 43 species, without ever needing a second strike. The cartel had made approximately 37 billion credits on his streak. Records from the Colosseum's commercial archive, which I have personally reviewed since my retirement, show that on the night of the match, the cartel had pre-purchased advertising for the 212th victory celebration. They had printed merchandise. They had bribed 3 council members to extend the broadcast window. The fix was so deep that the bookmakers had set the human survival odds at 400 to 1, not because they believed it was possible, but because the cartel had instructed them to make the loss look surprising. The human was supposed to die in under 20 seconds. He was filler, a body, a piece of meat shipped in from a holding cell on a neutral station to round out the night's card. The Colosseum's matchmakers had selected him from a list of detained brawlers, men and women arrested for fighting in bars across the rim worlds. Marcus Vale was 41 standard years old. He had been arrested for putting a Threnic enforcer through a table during a dispute over a drink. He had no augmentations. He had no special weapons. He had not fought professionally in over a decade. He was, by every metric our scouts tracked, not special. I always find it fascinating how the wealthy and the engineered demand proof of excellence from the unmodified. They look at a man like Marcus Vale and they see absence. No plate density, no regenerative tissue, no combat-tailored musculature, and from that absence they conclude weakness. They forgot to ask what he had instead. The Threnic mining cartel had spent 6 generations breeding a champion. The United Earth Special Operations Command had spent the same 6 generations doing something stranger. They had taken ordinary men and women, soft, slow, breakable, and made them rehearse the same motions 10,000 times in the dark. The cartel built a warrior. The humans built a habit. Habits, as the galaxy was about to learn, do not die when the body is afraid. The strategy of engineered superiority had finally met something it could not account for. And the cartel, for all its money and all its bribed council members, had walked into the trap with both eyes wide open. Part 3. If your understanding of human combat capability comes from the popular dramas, the soft worlds, or Beneath the Blue Star, or any of the 17 seasons of Earth's Children, then you have been lied to for entertainment. Those dramas portray humans as fragile, sentimental pack animals. They show humans winning fights through swarming, through emotional outbursts, through the love of a comrade or the death of a child. The dramas are wrong. They are wrong because they were written by Scythian screenwriters who had never met a human in person, and they were wrong because the lie was profitable. A sentimental human is a manageable human. A trained human is something else entirely. The galactic betting houses had read those dramas, so had Koreth's handlers, so had the cartel's odds makers. The 400 to 1 survival line was not built on data, it was built on fiction. Real human special operations doctrine, which I have studied extensively in my retirement, with the help of a retired Earth officer who agreed to speak to me on condition of anonymity, is built on a principle that other species find genuinely offensive. The principle is this: talent is a liability. Talent makes you improvise. Talent makes you trust your reflexes. Talent makes you reach for the clever move when the boring move would have killed the enemy 3 seconds ago. Human doctrine despises talent. Human doctrine worships the boring, the slow reload, the mechanical breath, the 1,000th identical repetition of a motion that any genetically engineered Drathani warrior would consider beneath his dignity to practice. Consider the case of the Scythian gladiator Varen Sohm, who fought Koreth 14 matches before Marcus Vale. Varen was a noble. He had trained for 60 cycles under the great master Olin Threth. He carried a ceremonial blade that had been in his family for 9 generations. He entered the arena with honor in his posture and a recorded prayer playing softly through his helmet. Koreth crushed his throat in under 30 seconds. The Colosseum's chroniclers recorded Varen's death as a tragedy of misplaced honor. They were wrong about that too. Honor was not Varen's mistake. Varen's mistake was that he had spent 60 cycles becoming exceptional at one thing, the perfect strike with a perfect blade, and he had no fallback when the perfect strike failed. He had trained for victory. He had not trained for the second, after victory failed to arrive. Marcus Vale had trained for nothing else. This is the part the dramas leave out. Human soldiers do not rehearse winning. They rehearse the moment after their first plan dies. They rehearse the malfunction, the jammed weapon, the dropped magazine, the bleeding wound that has not yet been noticed. They rehearse this in the dark, in the rain, with their eyes taped shut, until the recovery from disaster becomes faster and smoother than the original plan. Imagine asking a Drathani warlord to practice losing. The very suggestion would be a deathly insult. To rehearse failure in Drathani culture is to invite it. A warrior who imagines defeat has already begun to accept it. And so Korath, in his 211 matches, had never once rehearsed what to do if his first charge failed to kill the enemy. He had never needed to. The first charge had always been enough. It would not be enough tonight. The fracture between these two doctrines is the entire story of what happened on the sand. Korath was the champion of a culture that had engineered struggle out of its training regimen. Marcus was the product of a culture that had made struggle the entire regimen. The galaxy had made its bets without understanding that it was not watching two warriors fight. It was watching two philosophies collide. And one of those philosophies had spent 10,000 hours preparing for the worst day of its life. The other had spent 6 generations being told the worst day would never come. Part 4. The holding pen beneath the Sovereign Colosseum is shaped like a half-moon and lit in green. I have walked through it 3 times in my career, always for documentary purposes, never as a fighter. The pen smells of recycled air and the chemical residue of fear hormones from 12 different species. The walls are reinforced transparent steel. The benches are bolted to the floor. There is a single screen in each cell that broadcasts the live match above, so the next fighter can see what is about to kill him. Marcus Vale was brought to Cell 7 at 2100 local hours. He had been arrested 4 standard days earlier in a bar called the Long Memory on the neutral station of Brekyan. The arrest report, which I obtained through a contact in the station's records office, describes the incident with admirable brevity. A Threnic enforcer named Vals Denkar had approached Marcus's table and demanded he vacate. Marcus had declined. Vals had drawn a shock baton. Marcus had taken the baton from him, broken it in half, and placed Vals through a structural table designed to hold the weight of a Drathani. The arrest report notes that this took approximately 4 seconds. The station authorities, eager to avoid a cartel incident, had quietly sold Marcus's contract to the Colosseum's matchmakers. He was Class 3 filler. The matchmakers did not even bother to interview him. They simply added his name to the night's card and assigned him to the opening match against Korath. The plan was that Marcus would die quickly, the crowd would warm up, the real entertainment would follow. From Cell 7, Marcus watched the match before his own. It was a young Scythian, Tem Olenver, the son of a minor diplomat from the 4th cluster. The boy had been 17 cycles old. He had been sentenced to the arena for the crime of writing a poem that criticized the cartel. His family had paid an enormous bribe to have the sentence reduced to a single match, with the understanding that the match would be against a lesser opponent. The cartel had assigned him to Korath instead. I will not describe the death in detail. I described it once on broadcast, and I have regretted it ever since. It is enough to say that Korath crushed the boy's skull against the eastern wall of the arena, and that he did so slowly, and that the crowd of 80,000 cheered. The broadcast captured the cheer. The broadcast captured the sound the boy made. The broadcast captured the cartel executives in the luxury box raising their glasses. The broadcast also captured Marcus Vale. I have reviewed the cell footage from that 90-second window perhaps 300 times. I keep returning to it because I do not understand what I see. Marcus is sitting on the bench. The screen above him is showing the boy's death. The audio is loud enough to hear. Marcus does not look away. He does not flinch. He does not weep. He does not pray. He checks his sidearm. The Colosseum issues a standard kinetic pistol to every Class 3 fighter. It is a deliberately mediocre weapon. 12 rounds per magazine. 1 spare magazine on the belt. A polymer frame designed to feel cheap in the hand. The matchmakers issue these weapons as a gesture of mercy, a small token of dignity for the doomed. The cartel had specifically requested that Marcus receive one, because the cartel believed it would make the death more amusing. Marcus removed the magazine. He inspected the spring. He reseated it. He cycled the slide. He performed a single dry reload, drawing the spare magazine from his belt, swapping it with the loaded one, returning the loaded magazine to the belt in approximately 3/4 of a second. The cameras in Cell 7 caught the motion. In the broadcast booth, 2 cycles above the sand, my co-commentator Threlvesh laughed at it. He thinks he is a soldier, Threll said into the open mic. He is rehearsing for a fight he will lose in 19 seconds. The crowd in the betting concourse laughed with him. I did not laugh. I have not been able to explain in all the years since why I did not laugh. Something in the motion bothered me. It was too smooth. It was too quiet. It was the motion of a man who had performed it 10,000 times before, in places far worse than this one, and who was not performing it now to impress anyone. He was performing it because his hands wanted to be sure. That is the moment I should have changed the odds. That is the moment, in retrospect, when a careful commentator would have begun to hedge his language. I did not. I trusted the bookmakers, and the bookmakers trusted the cartel, and the cartel trusted the streak. Try to grasp the sheer mistake of that 90 seconds. 80,000 spectators, 12 broadcast networks, 6 gambling syndicates, and 3 cartel executives all watched a 41-year-old human perform a dry reload in his cell, and not one of us understood what we were looking at. We were looking at a man counting his rounds in the presence of his own death, and finding the count acceptable. Part 5. The 90 seconds between Koreth's previous kill and Marcus Vale's entrance are, in the language of human soldiers, the hardest minute. I learned this term from the retired officer I mentioned earlier. He explained that in his old unit, the minute before a violent encounter was considered the most dangerous part of the operation, not because anything was happening, but because nothing was. The body, he said, will betray a man in the minute before combat in ways it will never betray him during. The hands shake. The bowels loosen. The vision narrows. The mind invents catastrophes the body has not yet earned. Human special operations training spends an enormous amount of time on this minute. They call it the gap. They drill methods of compressing it, of filling it, of using it. They teach breath patterns. They teach mental scripts. They teach a man to use the gap to confirm what he already knows, rather than to imagine what he does not. You have probably heard the popular story that human fighters pray before combat, that they weep, that they call out to their loved ones, that they kiss religious objects. These stories are not lies, exactly. Some humans do these things in some contexts, but they are a Victorian fantasy of what alien audiences want human fighters to be. They are the sentimental version of a far stranger truth. The truth is that elite human fighters in the minute before violence become extraordinarily boring. The prep chamber footage of Marcus Vale shows him doing 4 things in his 90 seconds. He breathes. The breath pattern is 4 counts in, 7 counts hold, 8 counts out. This is a technique developed by Earth medical researchers in the late 20th century to lower the heart rate and reduce the cortisol response. Marcus performs it 11 times. By the 11th repetition, biometric readings, which the Colosseum captures from every fighter for insurance purposes, show his resting pulse at 52 beats per minute. He checks the magazine seating 3 times, not once, not twice, 3 times. Each check is identical. Each takes approximately 1.5 seconds. He is not checking because he is nervous. He is checking because the protocol is to check 3 times, and the protocol exists because in some forgotten engagement, decades before Marcus was born, a soldier died because he checked only twice. He stretches his trigger finger. He extends it fully, holds for 2 seconds, curls it, holds for 2 seconds, repeats. He does this 4 times. The 4th time, the finger is loose and warm and obedient. He looks at the ceiling for the last 15 seconds. He does not move. He does not speak. He does not appear to think. His eyes are open and unfocused, and his face is the face of a man waiting for a bus. In 4,063 matches, I have never seen a fighter look this calm in the prep chamber. I have seen the calm of warriors, the cold, focused calm of a Drathani warlord settling into rage, the meditative calm of a Scythian master entering the long mind, the predatory calm of an Omom hunter dropping its body temperature. Those calms are performances. They require effort. They are something the fighter is doing. Marcus was not doing anything. Marcus was being. Historians and combat philosophers have struggled for years to explain what was actually happening in those 90 seconds. Some have argued it was dissociation, a trauma response inherited from his years in Earth special operations. Others have argued it was a meditative state, a deep parasympathetic shift achieved through breath alone. The retired officer I spoke with rejected both explanations. He was running the tape, the officer told me. Every man in our line of work has a tape. It is a recording of every motion you will need to perform in the next 60 seconds. You run it once in your head, start to finish, and then you let it go. After that, you do not think. You do not plan. You let the tape play through your hands when the time comes. I asked him what was on Marcus's tape that night. He laughed and he said, probably the same thing that was on every tape. Draw the weapon, acquire the target, press the trigger 12 times, reload, press the trigger 12 times, walk away. I asked him if it was truly that simple. He stopped laughing. He looked at me for a long time and then he said, "It is not simple. It is the opposite of simple. It is the only thing in the universe that men like Marcus and I have ever truly mastered. We have mastered the refusal to add anything to the tape. We have mastered the discipline of doing exactly what we rehearsed, no more, no less. The galaxy thinks this is easy because it sounds easy. The galaxy has never tried it." The man who walked out of cell 7 and into the corridor toward the arena was not the same man who had been arrested in the bar 4 days earlier. The bar fighter had been a retired veteran killing time. The man in the corridor was something older and more specific. Something that the United Earth Special Operations Command had spent 10,000 hours building, and that no other species in the galaxy had ever bothered to construct. The wealthy fighter died in the prep chamber. A train one walked out. Part 6. The gate of the Sovereign Coliseum opens with a sound like a Starship Bay door, a deep mechanical groan followed by a hydraulic hiss. I have heard the sound 4,000 times. I can imitate it from memory. When the gate opened for Marcus Vale, the sand floor of the arena was still wet with the Scythian boy's blood. Koreth the Undefeated stood at the center, 12 meters from the gate, his energy lance raised in the salute posture the Colosseum required between matches. The crowd of 80,000 had quieted into the half-cheer reserved for fillers, a sound that means we acknowledge that you exist, and we acknowledge that you are about to stop existing. Marcus walked. I want to be clear about this because the recordings have been stylized in the years since and the popular renderings show him stalking forward like a predator. He did not stalk, he walked. The walk was the walk of a man going to inspect a piece of machinery in a workshop. His shoulders were loose. His sidearm was holstered. His left hand hung at his side. His right hand rested lightly on the grip of the weapon, thumb on the safety. The walk was approximately 4 meters per second. It was not slow and it was not fast. It was correct. Koreth did not understand the walk. None of us did. The Drathani warlord lowered his lance and roared, the traditional Drathani opening, designed to spike fear hormones in the opponent and trigger a panic response. The roar registered at 140 decibels on the arena monitors. The Scythian boy, 90 seconds earlier, had soiled himself at the sound. Marcus's biometrics did not change. His pulse stayed at 52. His pupils did not dilate. He kept walking. He stopped at the 7-meter mark. The arena rules required the fighters to begin at 12 meters. Marcus had closed 5 of those meters on his own. This was an unusual choice, and the crowd murmured at it. Closing distance against a Drathani warlord was considered suicide. It removed the human's only natural advantage, which was supposed to be the ability to stay out of reach. The cartel handlers in the luxury box laughed openly. They believed Marcus had panicked and made his first mistake. He had not panicked. He had calculated. The 7-meter mark was the optimal range for a Class 3 kinetic pistol against a Drathani target. At 12 meters, the rounds would have lost too much energy to penetrate the secondary plate. At 3 meters, Koreth's reach would have been a factor. At 7 meters, the math favored the human. This is the part of the story that the galaxy still refuses to absorb properly. Marcus Vale had done math. He had walked onto the sand and performed range estimation against a regenerative apex predator in real time, with no instrumentation, and had stopped at the precise distance where his deliberately mediocre weapon would be most effective. He had done this because he had performed the same calculation, in worse circumstances, several thousand times in his earlier career. The doctrine that Human Special Operations Command had been quietly perfecting for 2 centuries was about to make its public debut in the Galactic Arena Circuit. The doctrine has a name. The name is the tactical reload, and the name is wrong, because it is not really about reloading. It is about a complete operational philosophy that the rest of the galaxy had not only failed to develop, but had failed to even imagine. The doctrine assumes the following things to be true. The weapon will fail. The plan will fail. The first volley will not be enough. The enemy will not die when he is supposed to die. The shooter will be afraid. The shooter's hands will shake. The shooter will have to perform a complex manual task while a creature larger and faster than him is closing the distance to kill him. The doctrine assumes all of this, and then the doctrine asks, given that all of this will happen, what is the smallest, most boring, most repeatable motion that will keep you alive? The answer the doctrine arrived at, after 120 years of revision, after thousands of dead soldiers and millions of training hours, was approximately 3/4 of a second of practiced muscle memory. The galaxy had never seen this motion performed in combat. The galaxy did not know the motion existed. Every other species had engineered the need for the motion out of its weapons. The Drathani lance never ran dry. The Scythian blade never required reloading. The Ohm growth replenished itself. In the entire Galactic Arena Circuit, no fighter had ever needed to refill a weapon mid-combat, because no fighter had ever carried a weapon that could run out. Marcus's weapon could run out. Marcus's weapon would run out. Marcus had built his entire operational plan around the fact that his weapon would run out, and around what he would do in the 3/4 of a second after it did. I realize this sounds anticlimactic. A reload, a small mechanical motion involving a magazine and a slide release. It is the kind of detail a Galactic Arena audience would normally find embarrassing beneath the dignity of the spectacle. But this is precisely the point. The galaxy had spent 10,000 years making combat dignified. Marcus Vale was about to remind us that combat is not dignified. Combat is a man in dirty clothes, performing a boring motion with shaking hands, while something terrible runs at him. The doors had opened, the walk was finished, the math was done, the tape was running. The reinvention of galactic combat doctrine was 9 seconds away. Part 7. The weapon in Marcus Vale's hand was officially designated the Coliseum Service Pistol, Mark IV. It was, by any honest assessment, a terrible weapon. The polymer frame was selected for cheapness rather than durability. The barrel was rifled to specifications that prioritized cost over accuracy. The trigger had a 4.5-pound pull with a gritty break and a long reset. The magazine held 12 rounds of standard kinetic ammunition, and the fighter received one spare magazine on the belt, for a total of 24 shots. The Colosseum's armorers had selected this weapon specifically because it was bad. The reasoning, documented in internal procurement memos I have since obtained, was that Class 3 fighters would panic in combat and waste their ammunition on poorly aimed shots. The bad trigger would slow their rate of fire. The cheap sights would worsen their accuracy. The limited magazine capacity would force them to confront the futility of their situation sooner rather than later. A merciful weapon, the armorers reasoned, was one that prevented the doomed fighter from dragging out his own death. The cartel had personally requested that Marcus receive the Mark IV. They believed it would make the broadcast more entertaining. A human flailing with a cheap pistol against a Drathani warlord was, in their estimation, ideal opening match content. The armorers and the cartel had made a single shared assumption. They had assumed that the weapon would be operated by a panicked amateur. They had not considered the possibility that the weapon would be operated by a professional who had spent 20 years of his life with weapons that were, in their own ways, equally terrible. Marcus Vale had carried the SIG P-226 in his early Earth Special Operations career. He had carried the Glock 19 in the middle period. He had carried the FN 509 in his final deployment. Each of these weapons had idiosyncrasies. Each had a different trigger pull, a different reset, a different sight picture. Marcus had drilled with each of them in the dark, in the rain with his offhand, with one eye taped shut. He had spent more hours behind weapons than the Mark IV had existed as a product line. The Mark IV, to him, was simply another bad pistol in a long career of bad pistols. He had assessed it during the issuance procedure in Cell 7. He had identified the gritty break. He had compensated for it during his dry-fire reset checks. He had noted that the magazine release sat slightly forward of optimal placement and had prepositioned his thumb accordingly. He had estimated the rifling's accuracy degradation at the 7-meter mark and had concluded the weapon was adequate. The Galaxy had handed him a deliberately broken tool, and he had spent 90 seconds quietly making it functional. In the broadcast booth, the cartel's contracted systems analysts were now running emergency probability updates. I remember this clearly because Threlvesh, my co-commentator, had access to the live odds feed and announced the changes on air. At the moment the gate opened, Marcus's survival odds had been 400 to 1. At the moment he stopped walking at the 7-meter mark, the odds had compressed to 80 to 1. By the time he had been standing motionless for 2 seconds, the odds were at 15 to 1. Threlvesh laughed at the shift. He said the algorithms were overreacting to the walk. He said the cartel's analysts had clearly been drinking. He said this on a live broadcast to 12 networks. The cartel's analysts had not been drinking. The cartel's analysts had been quietly observing what I had failed to observe in the prep chamber and what the crowd had failed to observe during the walk. They had noticed the resting pulse. They had noticed the prepositioned thumb. They had noticed the 7-meter math. They had noticed, in short, the long shadow of a doctrine they did not recognize but had begun to fear. One of those analysts, a Threnic named Paul Venkor, whom I interviewed years later, told me that he had attempted to call the cartel's executive box at the 4-second mark. He had wanted to warn them to suspend their pre-recorded victory broadcast. He had wanted them to delay the merchandise release. He had wanted, in his own words, to stop the fall. The cartel did not take his call. 3 billion credits were about to evaporate because the people holding the money had decided, 400 to 1, that practice was not a weapon. Part 8. Koreth charged at the 4-second mark. I will describe what happened in the order that it happened. The recordings have been slowed, sped, reversed, and recut so many times in the years since that the canonical version has been lost. I am giving you the version that the arena's primary broadcast captured in real time, frame by frame, before any editor touched it. Korath dropped his lance into the forward grip and accelerated. A charging Drathani warlord crosses 7 meters in approximately 1 1/10 seconds. Korath's recorded time on that charge was 1.08 seconds, slightly faster than his career average, suggesting he had perceived Marcus as a contemptible opponent and had not bothered to pace himself. Marcus drew his sidearm at the moment Korath began to move. The draw stroke took approximately 0.4 of a second from holster to first shot. This is a standard professional draw time for an experienced human operator. The first round struck Korath in the upper chest plate at a range of 6.2 meters. The round was a standard kinetic projectile, 12 millimeters in diameter, traveling at approximately 400 meters per second. It did not penetrate the primary plate. The cartel handlers in the luxury box began to applaud. They believed the failure of the first round confirmed their thesis. The human had drawn quickly, fired once, and failed to harm Korath. The remaining 11 rounds in the magazine would, by their estimation, also fail to penetrate. The match would end as planned. Marcus fired the remaining 11 rounds in 2.1 seconds. Each round struck within a circle approximately the size of a Drathani fist, centered on the joint where Korath's primary chest plate met his secondary plate. This grouping is, by human professional standards, acceptable but not exceptional. By the standards of every other species in the galaxy, it was incomprehensible. No other species had ever achieved a 12-round grouping at 6 meters against a moving target. The math was beyond their experience. The 11th and 12th rounds penetrated the joint. Korath's regenerative tissue began to seal the wounds immediately. His tertiary heart compensated for the partial damage to his primary. He continued his charge. The crowd, which had begun to murmur, returned to cheering. The match, in their estimation, was proceeding normally. Marcus's slide locked back on an empty magazine at the 6.5-second mark. Korath was now 3.2 meters away. What happened next is the motion that the Galactic Arena circuit had never witnessed in its 800-cycle history. I will describe it slowly, although it occurred in approximately 3/4 of a second. Marcus's left thumb hit the magazine release. The spent magazine dropped from the weapon and began to fall toward the sand. As the magazine fell, his left hand moved to his belt, drew the fresh magazine, and inserted it into the well. The motion was so practiced that the fresh magazine was inserted before the spent magazine had finished falling. His right thumb hit the slide release. The slide returned to battery. A fresh round was now in the chamber. The weapon was operational again. The spent magazine hit the sand and began to spin. Korath mid-charge slowed. This is the moment the galaxy still does not understand. Korath did not slow because he had been wounded. Korath slowed because his brain, the brain of an apex predator who had killed 211 opponents, encountered a motion it had no category for. He had seen humans before. He had seen weapons before. He had never, in his entire breeding line memory, seen a weapon refilled. He did not know what the motion was. He did not know what it meant. He did not know whether the human was performing a surrender ritual, a religious gesture, or a malfunction. The slowdown was approximately 0.4 of a second. Marcus had needed 3/4 of a second to reload. Korath had given him 0.4. The remaining 0.3 of a second of operational deficit were absorbed by Korath's confusion, which extended an additional 1/10 as his head tilted slightly to the right, the universal carbon-based mammalian gesture, for I do not understand what I am looking at. Marcus fired his 13th round at the 8-second mark. He fired the next 11 in 1.2 seconds. This second grouping was tighter than the first. 12 rounds within a circle the size of a Drathani palm, centered not on the joint this time but on the lower left quadrant of Korath's chest, where the warlord's primary heart sat behind a section of secondary plate that the first volley had already weakened. The 8th round of the second volley penetrated the heart. The 9th round penetrated the heart again. The 10th, 11th, and 12th rounds were administered to a target that was already, by all medical standards, deceased. Korath the Undefeated fell forward at the 9-second mark. He fell 2 meters from Marcus. His momentum carried him another meter past the human's position. His 3 hearts stopped within 4/10 of a second of each other. His regenerative tissue continued to function for another 11 seconds, attempting to seal wounds that no longer mattered. The crowd of 80,000 did not cheer. The crowd did not make any sound. In the broadcast booth, my co-commentator Threll Vesh was attempting to speak. He was forming the opening syllable of a word, I believe it was impossible, and was unable to complete it. His mandibles were moving, but no sound was emerging. I have reviewed the footage. He looked, for the first time in our 7 cycles of working together, genuinely afraid. I was silent. I had nothing to say. I had spent 26 cycles preparing to narrate exactly this kind of moment, and I had nothing to say. The script in my head, the script every commentator carries, the script that fills the dead air after a kill, had no entry for what had just happened. The script assumed the audience would understand what they had watched. The script assumed I would understand what I had watched. Neither assumption was true. Marcus Vale holstered his sidearm. He looked down at Korath's body for approximately 2 seconds. He did not smile. He did not raise his arms. He did not address the crowd. He turned and walked back toward the gate at the same 4 meters per second pace he had used on the way in. The walk took him 11 seconds. In those 11 seconds, the silence of the Sovereign Coliseum became the longest silence in the history of galactic broadcasting. It registered, on the audio engineer's meters, at a level lower than the Coliseum's ambient mechanical hum. 80,000 spectators had stopped breathing in unison. The structure of the arena itself seemed quieter, as if the building had been listening too. The gate opened, Marcus walked through, the gate closed. The spent magazine was still spinning on the sand. Part 9. The Coliseum's Governing Council convened an emergency review at 2300 hours the same night. I was not invited, but I have since read the transcript. The council watched the footage of the match 17 times. They consulted their rule book. They consulted their precedents. They consulted 3 independent biomechanics experts and 2 cartel lawyers. They were searching, with increasing desperation, for a rule that Marcus Vale had broken. There was no rule. The weapon had been Coliseum-issued. The ammunition had been Coliseum-issued. The range had been within regulation. The draw had been within regulation. The reload, and this was the part the council struggled with the longest, had not been prohibited by any clause in the rule book, because no previous fighter had ever performed one. The council had never imagined the need to regulate reloads. They had to add the relevant clause to the rule book at 2600 hours that night, a clause that prohibited any fighter from carrying a spare magazine, retroactive to the next cycle's matches. The clause did not affect Marcus's victory. It only ensured that no other human would ever be allowed to do what he had done. The Threnic mining cartel lost 3.1 billion credits in the first 6 hours after the match. The pre-recorded victory broadcast was leaked to a rival network and played in mockery for the next 40 cycles. 3 of the cartel's executive board members were quietly removed. The analyst Paul Vencourt, who had attempted to warn the executive box, was promoted to chief risk officer and remained in that position until his death 12 cycles later. The Galactic Combat Academies, institutions that had not changed their curricula in 800 cycles, began, very quietly, to enroll human instructors. The first to do so was the Om Combat Conservatory, which announced a new course on manual weapon manipulation in the cycle following the match. The course was taught by a retired Earth Special Operations officer whose name I am not at liberty to disclose. Within 5 cycles, every major combat academy in the galaxy had hired at least one human instructor. Within 10 cycles, the practice of training fundamentals, the boring, repetitive, unglamorous drills, had been quietly integrated into curricula across 43 species. The galaxy had remembered that practice was a weapon. It had taken 3.1 billion credits and a dead warlord to remind us. The spent magazine was recovered from the sand by the arena's cleanup staff at 0300 hours. The staff member who recovered it, a young Scythian named Vel Thretholin, who had been hired the previous cycle, placed it in a containment bag rather than the standard waste bin. She told her supervisor that it felt wrong to throw it away. The supervisor agreed. The supervisor placed the magazine in the Colosseum's evidence archive, where it sat for 40 cycles before the council voted to display it permanently. It is, as of this broadcast, still on display. The magazine sits in a reinforced glass case in the central concourse of the Sovereign Colosseum. The case is mounted on a pedestal of black stone. The pedestal is engraved in 17 languages with a single label. The label reads, "The object that ended the streak." I have visited the case twice. I have stood in front of it and tried to feel what the case is supposed to make me feel. I have not succeeded. The magazine is a piece of polymer and metal. It is 12 centimeters long and weighs approximately 90 grams. It is, by every honest assessment, not special. It is also the most visited exhibit in the Sovereign Colosseum's 800-cycle history. Marcus Vale collected his contractual purse the morning after the match. The purse, for a Class 3 filler, was 47,000 credits. He did not negotiate for more. He did not give interviews. He did not appear at the post-match press event. He boarded a civilian transport to the Rim Worlds at 0800 hours and disappeared from public records. I have in the years since attempted to locate him 3 times. I have not succeeded. The retired officer I spoke with told me that this was correct behavior. He said that men like Marcus do not stay. He said they perform the task they were trained to perform. They collect the payment if there is one, and they go back to the lives they prefer. He said this without bitterness or sentiment, as if he were describing a phenomenon as natural as weather. I asked him if Marcus understood what he had done. The officer thought about this for a long time. Then he said, he understood that he had performed his job. I do not think he understood the rest. The rest was not his job. Epilogue. I retired from the broadcast booth 4 cycles after the Marcus Vale match. The official reason was age. The unofficial reason was that I had lost confidence in my ability to interpret what I was seeing. 26 cycles of experience had failed to prepare me for 9 seconds of footage, and I could not in good conscience continue to narrate matches when I no longer trusted my own analysis. I have spent the years since researching what happened that night. I have interviewed the retired Earth officer. I have interviewed the analyst Paul Vancourt. I have interviewed 17 members of the audience and 3 of the council. I have reviewed the footage perhaps 2,000 times. I have written, at the time of this broadcast, approximately 400,000 words on the subject. I have arrived at one conclusion, which I will share with you now. The galaxy, for 10,000 cycles, has been engineering its way past struggle. We have bred our champions. We have replaced our manual systems with self-regulating ones. We have removed the need for practice from every domain in which practice was once required. We have done this because it was profitable, and because it was elegant, and because we believed it was progress. Humans, alone among the advanced species, refused. I do not know why they refused. I have asked the officer this question, and he has not been able to answer it. The best he could offer was that humans seem to like the feel of mastery, the slow, accumulated, repetitive feel of doing something 10,000 times until the body knows it without the mind's help. He said this was a cultural preference, not a logical one. He said his grandfathers had practiced, and his great-grandfathers had practiced, and that he practiced because they had practiced, and that he could not give a better reason than that. I think this is the truest answer I have ever received about human nature. The galaxy forgot that practice was a weapon. We forgot it because we had made it unnecessary, and the unnecessary in our civilization becomes the forgotten. Humans did not forget because humans never made it unnecessary. They kept rehearsing fundamentals in the dark, against no visible enemy, for no visible reward, because their grandfathers had rehearsed and they did not see a reason to stop. On the night of the match, the unnecessary met the unforgotten. The unnecessary lost. I want to close this broadcast with a small confession. Throughout this archive and throughout my career, I have mispronounced the human's name. I have said Marcus and Marcus and Marcus. This is because the V-hierarch's mouthparts cannot form the human consonant C without effort. I have, in my retirement, spent considerable time training myself to make the sound correctly. It is, in its own small way, a practice. I have rehearsed it 10,000 times. I do not yet make it perfectly, but I make it well enough. His name is Marcus, Marcus Vale. I owe him that, and I owe his species that, and I owe the boring, sacred fact of practice itself that small linguistic concession. The question I leave you with is the one I have been unable to answer in all my years of research. Was it skill that won that night? Was it the doctrine, the drills, the 10,000 hours in the dark? Or was it something simpler and more embarrassing, that the galaxy had spent 10,000 cycles forgetting what humans were actually good at, and that one night, in front of 80,000 witnesses, a 41-year-old man with a cheap pistol decided to remind us? I do not know. I suspect I will never know. Leave your answer in the comments. I want to read them. This has been HFY, formerly of Chamber 7. Thank you for listening. The broadcast is closed.